Has God ever called you to something and you've not been obedient? I have. My mom died. It's been a year now. And I shared my testimony at her funeral. And I thought that by doing that, that was me living in obedience. But then quickly thereafter, God moved boldly in my life and has continued to move and show me who he is and who I am in him over the past year. And one of the things that he's called me to do through that is to share my testimony and the story of my mom's passing more broadly. And I haven't done that. I think the enemy has kept me in chains for a while now, and I'm ready to break those free. So here we go. As a believer, I think many of us read the stories in the Old Testament or the New Testament, and we read them like a storybook. We understand that Jesus died on the cross. He was buried in a tomb. He rose again 3 days later. We understand that. We believe it. But to believe, truly believe everything else that's in there, it's hard. That takes faith. It takes understanding who God is. And many of us go to church on Sunday, but we don't take the time to read in the Word beyond that every day, meditate, pray to him, speak to him, and to step into the authority and power he's given us. You know, in Romans and Ephesians, it talks about the fact that the same power that caused Christ to rise from the dead, that same power lives within us when you have the Holy Spirit. Jesus told us that that power would allow us to heal the sick, speak in tongues, to cast demons out. How many of you have ever done that? Because we live in this culture that tells us the Bible is nothing more than a fairy tale. But I'm here to tell you, I have had profound experiences spiritually in the past year that have proven otherwise. I'm going to share with you the recording from my mom's funeral and what I said. But the biggest thing I want anybody to take away from that is that, first of all, my mom was a wonderful person. And although I lost her a year ago, I really lost her 30 years ago. When I was a little girl, my mom became dependent on opioids. And I fought that battle with her for many, many years because I wanted my mom back. And the world told me to walk away from her. The world told me that, you know, she needed to go to therapy. She needed to go to rehab. And yeah, maybe she did need some of that. But that wasn't getting at the root cause of what was happening. And what was happening is that I know now is that my mom was demonically oppressed. My mom was a believer. She had the Spirit of God living in her, and that means you cannot be demonically possessed, but she was demonically oppressed. And she fought that battle for a long time. And I prayed a lot for God to heal her. And I never understood why he didn't heal her. But on the day of her death, my mom went into the hospital and she had a mild case of pneumonia. About a year before she passed, our pastor at church started talking a lot about spiritual warfare. And I'd never really heard a pastor talk about that before. And so he sent a podcast over to myself and my husband to help educate us more about spiritual warfare. And as I dove into that podcast and partnered that with the Word, studying the Word, God allowed the scales to fall off my eyes. And what I began to recognize is that as Christians, as believers, we're at war, but we've not been trained in battle. And God started training me in battle and helping me understand how to go to war on behalf of my mom. And so on the day she died, God told me to fast that morning. You'll hear more about this in what I'll share from her funeral. But God told me to fast because sometimes it's required for you to fast and pray for these things. It's part of being studied up as a warrior for God. You've got to understand what you're dealing with and what the Word says about this stuff. And God told me to fast that morning. I didn't know why. I went to the hospital. Again, mild case of pneumonia. Prayed over my mom, and I asked that through the blood of the Lamb and in the name of Jesus Christ, that any dark spirits, any darkness that had chains on her, she'd be set free. And later that day, she died. And I believe what happened is that my mom's flesh was too weak to fight off the demonic oppression. And when that prayer, Jesus set her free. And when she was set free, he said, no more. Darkness cannot have her. And he came and got her. And that's what happened. And so for me, I want more people to wake up and understand that what you're dealing with in your life, this is not me saying that there's a demon under every rock, because there's not. We live in a fallen world, and we live in the flesh, and a lot of the stuff that we deal with is actually just like human to human. We're just living in the flesh. But there is the reality of spiritual warfare, and there's darkness out there, and the Bible tells us it's going to get worse before he returns. It's not going to get better. And so as Christians, what we need to do is let our light shine, because greater is he who is in us than he who is in the world. But you need to be trained in battle, because you're at war. Your family's at war. The enemy is after you. He's after your spouse. He's after your relationships. He's after your family. He's after your children. And you don't go to war without your armor or without your weapon. Your weapon is the word. That's how you go to war. So you need to know it. Not just go to church every Sunday and get your free coffee and sit in the pews and listen. That's good too. But you need to study the word. You need to understand what the word says. You need to spend time in prayer. You need to be in study groups. You need to absorb as much learning about God and who you are in him as you can, for the time is short. So I'm going to share with you what I said at my mom's funeral. I just wanted to come on here and provide some context. And then I'm also, when the time's right, when I feel led, I'm going to share more about my spiritual journey over the past year and what's happened to me, because I think it's really important. I hope this is a blessing to at least one person. Thanks.
What I want you to know about my mom is that she was a beautiful person inside and out. She was such a giver. I think you probably can get that from what's already been shared. She always placed giving to others first in her life. She also loved her family immensely. She was a proud grand-gran to my children, Aiden and Sophia. She was my mom. She raised me on her own and gave me a wonderful childhood. And during the majority of my childhood, she held a leadership role in her career, which really inspired me and in many ways shaped my own professional journey. My childhood was filled with many, many peaks. However, where there are peaks, there must also be valleys. Those valleys contain either one of two components, and sometimes you get both. They contain physical pain or trials and spiritual battles. And what's more is God makes it clear that while we have our physical bodies, we are also spiritual beings with eternal souls. My mom's physical body came with some defects. And where we have deficiencies, unless we're prepared to turn those over to God to help us, Satan will use where we are deficient to creep into our lives and to take hold. You see, God tells us in Ephesians 6 that we are not fighting flesh and blood, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. My mom, when I was 8 years old, began to be plagued by those evil spirits. Darkness entered her life, and ultimately mine. But it wasn't some apparent, dark, nefarious situation where everything changed. It was a slow progression, something that happened over time. And while it'd be really easy for me to stand here and place blame to the medical community for prescribing the first pain medications, blame for friends or family who enabled the behavior, even blame for her, I know in my heart that all of these things or people are a part of a broken world. And I know that the blame rests solely with the evil that rules this world. Remember what I just said with Ephesians 6. But it wasn't all dark. There were plenty of peaks that would remain over the past 30 years and many wonderful memories, and I will hold on to those for the rest of my days. However, the valleys were really painful. You see, the world told me long ago that I should walk away from my mom, that I had done everything humanly possible for her, and that in order for me to have my own peace, I should walk away. That's what the world said. But God tells us in Ephesians 6:2 to honor your father and mother. So I continued to honor her in ways that I felt were pleasing to God. Next, the world tried to tell me that all the things that were wrong with her were easily explainable by the medical community and science, from opioid addiction to mental illness to physical ailments. But remember Ephesians 6? We do not fight flesh and blood. We fight evil spirits in the heavenly realm. I've known for a long time that what happened to my mom, it wasn't her, it was something dark. I just wasn't close enough to God at the time to understand it. As a child, I tried to battle that evil on my own, and once I came to faith at the age of 12, I realized I needed to turn to God. From that point forward, I begged, I pleaded, I cried out for God to intervene in her life, for me to get my mom back. I heard nothing. I heard nothing for 3 decades, only to continue to honor her, so I did. Then something changed last year. My mom was forced out of some of her earthly habits, and she experienced an emergency amputation and was forced into a setting that removed her overnight from some of the darkness that she had been surrounded by for so long. Although the past year has been difficult, my mom and I have grown closer this year. We've talked about Jesus, we've laughed together, we've prayed together. And several months ago, I was listening to a podcast about spiritual warfare. Did you know that the Bible tells us that there are millions of angels? And did you know that what's more, in Revelation, it tells us that 1/3 of those angels fell with Satan? Where do you think all those fallen angels are today? I believe they're responsible for the confusion, despair, and darkness we see so prevalent in our culture today. And I believe that this darkness had hold of my mom. So I began to specifically pray over this, that God would banish the darkness from her in his name. I prayed this every day for months, and it wasn't working. Then a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to a pastor who was retelling a story from the Gospel of Mark, where in response to Jesus' disciples asking why they couldn't cast out a demon, Jesus says, this kind requires prayer and fasting. You see, prayer and fasting together has great power. It's not that God needs us to do anything. He can do it all on his own. God invites us to partner with him through prayer and fasting. And when we listen, when we're obedient, he moves on our behalf, and he increases our faith. He increases our knowledge of who he is. He reveals his character. On Thursday of last week, my mom was admitted to the hospital with a mild case of pneumonia. On Friday, after I had gone to the gym and was on my way home to get ready for the day, Jesus told me that I should fast for the day because I would need mental clarity. I told Jesus, I'm really hungry. I just left the gym and I want to eat. And Jesus just said, fast. So I did. After I dropped my kids off at school, I went by the hospital to visit her. We laughed together. I told her I'd be by the next day to see her and I'd bring Sophia. And before I left, we prayed. I held her hand and prayed that in the name of Jesus Christ, the living Son of God, Jesus would rebuke any evil spirits or darkness that surrounded her, that she would be fully healed and restored. When I got done praying, I expected her to give me somewhat of a strange look because that's kind of an odd prayer and she may not have known what I was praying about. But she didn't give me an odd look. She just said, thank you. Before I tell you this last part, I want to read a passage from the Bible to you, Mark 9:14. When they returned to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd surrounding them, and some teachers of religious law were arguing with them. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. "What is all this arguing about?" Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy. But when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. He replied, "Since he was a little boy, the spirit often throws him into the fire or into the water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." "What do you mean, if I can?" Jesus asked. "Anything is possible if a person believes." The father instantly cried out, "I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that the crowd of onlookers was growing, he rebuked the evil spirit. "Listen, you spirit that makes this boy unable to hear and speak," he said, "I command you to come out of this child and never return." Then the spirit screamed, and he left the boy. The boy appeared to be dead. A murmur ran through the crowd as people said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. Afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, "Why couldn't we cast out that evil spirit?" And Jesus said, "This kind can only be cast out by prayer and fasting." So you see, similar to this story, my mother was plagued by darkness. Similar to the boy, the darkness had tried to kill her many times. Last year, when she first had her amputation, I asked her to print off a list for me so I'd know all the medical diagnoses that she had and all the prescriptions she was on. And so this list, this huge list, represents all that the medical community had diagnosed her with: diabetes, heart disease, mental illness, depression, anxiety, opioid addiction, suicidal thoughts. The list goes on and on. But you see, just as Jesus had power over the darkness, so do you and I when he lives within us. Amen. And on Friday, when I prayed that prayer over my mother while fasting, the darkness let go. And when the darkness let go, Jesus reached down, just like he did with that little boy, and he grabbed my mother by the hand and carried her to heaven. On Friday afternoon, the doctor called me and told me that my mom was dying and wouldn't have long to live. So I got into my car and I sped to the hospital. As soon as I got a few minutes down the road, Jesus very clearly said to me, "I have received her into my arms." The very next second, I received a call from the doctor that said she had passed. You see, on Friday, September 6th, at 3:21 p.m., that list I just held up, all the ways the darkness had tried to kill and hurt my mom over the years, Jesus healed her in an instant. She's now in heaven and is fully restored. Jesus answered my prayer, but it required an intimacy with God. It required disciplined obedience. It required not listening to the world, but to him. It required deep personal sacrifice, and it required faith. Listening to God, not the world, means that I have assurance that my mom is now in heaven. She's fully restored and she's healed. It also means that I understand the power that resides in me and that resides in every believer. I pray that you'll know it too. And in closing, I just want to share 3 things. If you don't know him, he's waiting on you. And we're eternal souls, and there's only 2 places for us to go. Yes. And the choice is yours. If you're a Christian, but you don't spend time knowing him, intimately knowing him, in the Word, right? Pray, whatever you got to do, now's the time to start. And stop trying to heal the world with the world. The world can only be healed through Jesus, and we need him now more than ever. Amen. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Keith, who was my pastor when I came to faith in my hometown church. And I've got a lot of admiration and respect for this church and for Pastor Keith and his wife Joan. So thanks for hosting us today. And